Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Theatre Art Life discussion. We're so glad that you have joined us again today. And before I introduce you to the wonderful Blake Levy, I'm going to give you a few housekeeping rules that most of you who have joined our sessions before know, but those who have not. In the right, there is a chat box, and please say hello. Tell us where you're from, where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. If for any reason you drop out today, you can log back in anytime via the email link or press reconnect at the top of the screen. And if you can't hear us, try logging out and logging back in again, okay? And if your internet is patchy today, don't worry, a replay will be available and it's going to be sent to you personally within the next 24 hours after this event. So thank you for joining us. Now, Blake Levy is an award-winning producer of television, film, and global broadcast specials. Across all his shows, Levy strives to bring audiences together around stories that serve as catalysts for change. Beginning his career at CBS Television Studios, Blake has served in a production capacity at AEG, Universal, and Warner Brothers before moving to an overall deal with Lionsgate. Since that time, Blake has produced the series Take on America for PBS, Los Angeles' successful 2028 Olympic bid, and the Democratic Party's rebuttal to the State of the Union address by Stacey Abrams, one of the highest rated broadcasts of 2019. And most recently, Levy worked with Biden for president as showrunner and studio operations, creating the first television studio for a presidential campaign. Blake, welcome to Theatre Art Life, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that intro.
So we want to get straight off the press and the topic. What you've just done right now is the Biden campaign. So tell us, what was your role on the Biden campaign and what did it involve?
Definitely. So my role in the campaign was to be showrunner and studio ops. And so what that boiled down to was designing and building the first television studio for a presidential campaign. And so I got the call in August for this, and up till that point, there's some iterations that had been done, but the idea was that as we go into the general election, to have a more robust set that we could use for omni-channel events, rather that be podium remarks to virtual town halls, anything that we may want to be able to do to connect Vice President Biden, then now President-elect Biden's vision for America to the voters across the country, because of the fact that we couldn't go out and do a lot of the normal stops, retail politics, rallies. And so it was, how can we create a safe environment? How can we create something that can connect his ideas with the American people? And so the idea was to build a studio so that we could talk to folks at any point around the clock over, at that point when I joined the campaign, 76 days to go.
Fantastic. And how is that different? So usually they're doing that on a campaign trail, correct? So this was all housed
Correct.
in one studio. And so what were the other sort of nuances of the setup there? How many people worked on the team?
Yeah, so it was something that was evolving from day one. The biggest thing was there wasn't a blueprint for this. As much as we think of it as a TV studio, you don't have, even for normal TV studios right now, you don't have the full crew. And so the first kind of requirement was okay, how are we going to do this safely? How are we going to get folks into the same room, and what are the COVID procedures? And that kind of was a guideline to kind of get us started with what are the kind of dynamics that we're playing within. And then from there it became, okay, we know that there's some basic formats that we're going to do. We're going to give remarks at a podium. We know that we're going to want to have a town hall type setup. And so we really kind of looked around, did some homework on successful ways that this had been done, and then started to kind of break down, okay, what is it that we need? And I think the biggest thing is that normally, if you're going to go build a studio or any type of soundstage, production, you're going to have like 3 to 6 months, I would say, from projects that I've been, working on to go ahead and do this. We had 6 days, 6 days between here we go to we're live. And so we had to think very quick on our feet and really build something that would work for a range of options, including options that we knew that we wouldn't be able to think of in the build stage. And so that's kind of the first part of the puzzle, is building something that really can be used to do anything that somebody can think of.
Mm. And so day to day in your work sort of environment, what was it? What was your role? Who did you manage? Who was the teams that you were working with?
Yeah, so did two things. One was bring together the folks. And so it was, okay, the question was, how many people do we need on site? And what are their roles and responsibilities? What are the roles that can be done remotely? And so we started by trying to build this as, only key personnel on site. We'd have one audio person, and there was a lot that we were doing in the cloud. And the more involved that we got, we ended up with a 20-person team on the ground. We took over a 6-story theater in Wilmington, Delaware, and basically just spread out over the 6 different floors. We had 2 studios in there, and we could go remotely from both places at the same time. And so we would have basically one person from each of the departments, audio, lighting, all the way on down, and then had kind of a robust engineering team that would make sure that we could do what we were doing with all of the incoming feeds, outgoing feeds, and different things.
And was it like live all the time, or is it something that was session to go live from time to time, or was it for his public addresses? Like how did the schedule work?
Yeah, so normally in a campaign, they would be doing, say, 3-4 events or 3 or 4 cities a day, and each time they go to a different city by the end of the campaign, they would be doing 3 or 4 events on the ground. So they could easily have 10, 12 stops a day, between simple things like going to get coffee to large rallies. And so each of those stops creates kind of media and buzz around it. And so the question was, how can we create that same buzz when they come into the studio? And so for President-elect Biden, he would come in and we would have multiple different events. And so there'd usually be one keynote event. The press would be in the room and we would deliver remarks or do a town hall or a briefing. And then before and afterwards, we would do interviews, we would do direct camera recordings, we would do some digital tapings. And so a day could have, 4 or 5 different parts. Between us starting the studio and ending, we did about 46 different types of things in there in a very short amount of time.
Was there ever a sense of, okay, this hasn't been done before, is it going to work, kind of within the team?
every day. I mean, the way in which we put the studio together really was different from past things. I kind of have always looked at politics and when you do advance as the same, rather it be in the studio or I got to work on 2016 for Secretary Clinton's campaign and did the same way, which was you're really setting up a theater show. And there's one set and you're on stage and you're communicating directly to the audience. But the audio is being done like it's for a podcast because of how it's being used in another format. And the lighting is done for television because of the cameras. And so you put all these different things together and then you go ahead and do it. Well, when you come into the studio environment, you're trying to replicate that connection to the audience, but the audience isn't there. And for somebody who's as personable as Joe Biden, it's how do you create something that's just not in the room? And so what we did to make it just even more different is that we'd add kind of a cinematic element to it, because by this point we've all been on Zooms, we've all been on webinars, we've all been on these formats. And so how do we really connect folks in a way that just, we wanted it to look different, we wanted it to feel different. And so but it was all live. Anytime that we were interacting with people, it was live. And so what we did is we shot it with cinematic cameras, and what that allowed us to do was kind of give it this richer, warmer feel, make it so that there's more depth of field, there's more focus on the subject, that you're really there having a conversation with him. And that had never been done, not with these cameras. And so everything from not doing it with the cameras to everything we had put together, we'd all had this meeting the day before we went live and go, okay, we've never actually done this before. There was no rehearsal. There was just, here's the best that we can get to go and try and deliver this message, to try and make folks feel like they're in the room, and let's put it together, and then let's hope it works.
Wow. And throughout the time that you were there, was there anything that kind of popped up as another idea that you should try and use? You know, did it evolve over the time that you were there?
Yeah, every day. And that's how we built the studio, was that, you know, a year ago, this technology didn't exist. People didn't use Zoom in a professional broadcast situation. And so a lot of these tools that have been, you know, coming out since March are workarounds. And so what we wanted to do was build something that was dynamic enough so that we could change, either change with technology or change with ideas. And so even though the original intention was, okay, we're going to go build this and it's going to be static, what we realized is that as we built week 1, we could iterate into week 2. And so every time we would do a show, we'd do a post-mortem after that show and go, okay, what did we like? What worked well? And then what can we improve? What ideas? And that's the part for me that's most fun. What are the ideas that we can use for tomorrow or next week to make this better, to make it smoother? And so after we got about 2 or 3 shows under our belt in this environment with how we were all working together, we were able to make a lot of changes and iterate very quickly.
That's amazing. Brian has a question. He says, do you have a down plan of the studio you could show? Probably not right now, but because we don't have it loaded at any point. But was the studio laid out as one black box or multiple stand-up locations akin to a new studio, podium, green screen, town hall monitor, etc.?
Yeah, so we were in a theater, and there was an open floor, so there was no fixed seating on the floor. There's a balcony level that had fixed seating, and then there was a stage. And the stage was only about 16 feet deep by about 27 feet wide, so it was not very big. And then the open floor was about 59 feet wide by about 60 feet deep. And the thing that we had to keep in mind was that everything we did needed to be socially distanced. And so when that started, that was that everyone on the floor had to be within a 6-foot radius apart. And everyone was wearing masks. And then what it became is that if we wanted to do anything on stage without a mask, that it was like a 12 to 15 foot kind of radius. And so in that space, it became very small very quickly. But the catch to that, right, is that at the same time, you know, you don't want to put one person in a room that is now gigantic so that that one person looks small. And so that was kind of the balancing act that we played. But as far as a ground plan is said, I don't have that loaded. But it was something that by the time we made a ground plan and sent it out to folks, and by the time trucks arrived, that ground plan had changed. When we started building to when we finished building, that ground plan had changed, and we'd continued to iterate on that ground plan. You know, even to this day, things are moving and changing. And so it really is become something like a black box almost, in that it's very dynamic.
Ah, interesting. You're a little bit choppy. Is everybody else hearing that, or is it just me? Just want to check in because it's a little bit choppy, the audio. Just answer in the chat box if you can. What I wanted to talk about, so you've also done the State of Union address, rebuttal to the State of the Union address. So you've been doing some of the politics stuff quite a lot. So how did you get involved in that from your previous work? And what's different about that compared to all of your other TV and event work? Definitely.
So my first kind of entry into politics was in 2013. I was working on the Grammys, and I sat next to a fella and just started a conversation. And he told me about this world of advance. And I was kind of blown away by it. On, you know, you've got 5 to 7 days to go plan something that's really going to be seen around the world and has a global impact and problem solving. And the biggest thing about kind of political touring or any production within the political sphere is that the percent of production in comparison to really anything we do, like whether it's a tour or TV and film, you know, production is a big part of what is going on. And so it has a big voice at the table. Within politics, it's a tool and a resource to achieve a goal. And so the trade-off there is you get a lot more autonomy, to decide different things, but it also means that you don't kind of get everything you want. You know, different things have a low priority. And so the State of the Union with Stacey Abrams, one of my favorite projects to work on, got the call on a Thursday, and the State of the Union was on a Tuesday, and they said, "Hey, are you available?" And we just leapt at the chance, and so flew down to Atlanta. And at the time, the Super Bowl was that weekend in Atlanta, and so the great news was any piece of gear and resource, talent, crew, they were all there in Atlanta. The problem was that everything was stuck in the arena, and so we need to kind of pull things out. But the fun part is you get to kind of look at opportunities like that where you're using stuff that came right off the Super Bowl to go put this other show together, and it's just using the different pieces in a unique way to ultimately do the same thing.
Keith asks, how do you manage the broadband requirements for such a critical live feed environment?
Well, in Wilmington for the studio, we had multiple different lines, hard lines coming in and out. And so we had 3 different carriers coming in. We also had a microwave. So it was redundancy after redundancy after redundancy. And then also had the ability that we also had a SAT truck at the end, and that would carry it. So.
Right. And so that was completely successful the whole time. There was never any dropouts or worries, or
there was one day towards the end where we got in early, a few of us to have a meeting. We were trying to figure something out, and we're sitting in there, and all of a sudden the power goes out, and we went, oh. And the power was something that from the beginning we talked about having a generator, but the way that the building was set up and the amount of power that we were bringing into it, there wasn't really a place to put the generator. We were kind of surrounded by streets on all 3 sides. But the building itself had a big AV switch that we could pull off 2 different grids. And so we that day called him the trouble man. But other than that day, there wasn't an issue.
Fortunately.
And nothing happened during the show. But that moment during the show, I was like, all right, just breathe through it.
That's amazing. So do you work closely with Biden as in your role and Stacey Abrams when you're there, or are you more in the periphery?
Yeah, so for this, it was something that due to COVID and everything else, I was the one person that became there from the moment that he got into the theater to getting him on stage to making sure that he was properly mic'd up. So it was everything from stage manager to directing to communicating with the team. I was the only one on the floor to do it, which was an incredible experience because you've got, a large production crew there, but because of COVID, it's like just really him and I on stage, and that's it.
Was there a COVID sort of compliance team that was advising you on all of the protocol? Were they there and involved intricately in temperature checks, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, everyone that came in the building was temperature checked. We had a QR code for everyone coming in to fill out the question and for contact tracing. Everyone who was the full-time production team, we were tested on a regular basis. So there was a very strict kind of adherence to, keeping everybody safe. In addition to, making sure that, even when we were not in the building, we were following and educated on best practices.
I think that, we're all dealing with that kind of protocol, and I've been doing some events here and we have to think about that. But I think the stakes are so much higher when you're talking about the presidential. I would imagine people being quite anxious about being particularly fastidious in cleaning and maintaining that space, right?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I remember one of the most vivid days was a Thursday night, kind of bed at 12, 11 o'clock, and woke up about 2 hours later to 83 messages on my phone, and I'm going, what in the world is going on? And the news had broke that President Trump had got COVID. And so that morning came in the studio, and it's one of those things where, if you're on a production and something like COVID happens, you shut down. But the fact that, he gets COVID, and this is now there's a global impact to that. And so the fact that we wanted to make sure that, part of the studio was built in the idea that this is a safe place to go to still communicate to the voters, get your message out. And so we needed to make sure that we were taking this as serious as possible, because, if one of us gets COVID, we're just 1 degree away. And so I wanted to make sure that we all stayed safe for each other, for him, for the job that we were doing, because it would create a headline. And at the end of the day, as a production person, we're there behind the scenes. The story's never supposed to be about us or what we do. And so wanted to make sure that, safety is always top concern for everything we do, and COVID is safety.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the headlines as the guy that gave Biden COVID, that's for sure. And so the other thing is, I guess, when you were during that time, because a lot of people might ask, is that were you sort of limiting your movement outside the studio? Were you staying sort of laying low? But because exposure outside is probably the highest chance that if you're being fastidious there, and then outside is where it's more dangerous. So were you laying low outside the work time?
Yeah, luckily there wasn't a lot of time that we weren't working. Any days that we weren't doing production in the studio with the principal, then we were usually either rehearsing, blocking, or rebuilding and making things better. But for the time that we were not in the studio, absolutely, really limiting our movements, making sure that we were always socially distanced. Everyone was always wearing a mask. At some point, the rules got a little bit more lax as far as, dining, but it was still something that, to limit that, take out as much as possible, and stay safe for each other.
Keith brings up a good point in terms of security, because obviously events like this have a larger level of security than, say, another event or a TV show or a movie. And what was the setup there, and how, how much coverage? You don't have to reveal trade secrets, of course, about security, but, you as a producer and dealing with that, that's obviously got to be another layer of organization and protocol you got to deal with, right? Yeah.
So, from day one, get on the ground and have a counterpart from the Secret Service, and they're fantastic, and they take care of really all the security requirements. We're in lockstep with things. Anytime that someone's coming to the studio, we have a conversation, we plan out the movements and walk through it. But they take care of security, and the nice thing for us is we were in the same building, and so it became something that was locked down because there was no audience in the building. That kind of made our movements a lot easier. So because of COVID, from a security standpoint, our life became a lot easier, because we didn't have to worry about as many moving pieces and parts. There wasn't as many people in the building to account for, and we were indoors.
Yeah. Now, you said earlier to me before we started this webinar that you like sort of the unusual events and the uncharted territory. Would this be an event that you considered that? I guess it was, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of things that I've been fortunate enough to do in my career have been one and done projects, really kind of venturing out into new territories. And there is not a blueprint. There isn't this has been done before, so we're going to do it this way, which is what I love about what I get to do. But it also means there's challenges. And for this, yes, there's been political events. Yes, there's been digital events, just this year. And there's been different campaign events. But what was unique about this was building something where we didn't know everything we were going to even use it for on day one. And so I would definitely put this in the category of having never been done before, and something that do take a lot of pride in being able to build a television studio for a candidate in this, unique time. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity.
Do you think post-COVID in the next election, there'd be any elements of that would be used again, despite the fact that people may be able to move around in the future? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was something that really served a unique purpose, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of time that goes into travel. And so in a normal year, especially in the last month of an election, a candidate will travel 6-7 days a week.
and they'll go to 3 or 4 cities. And so, they'll have a chartered plane, but it still takes, an hour in the air and 30 minutes to move from the airport to the location and back and forth. And so in that time, that's all time that you're not being able to talk to somebody. And so this is a unique way where you can jump across states, you can really connect with folks in a different dynamic way where you can go to people. And so I think that as the technology continues to expand, I think that this is going to be something that is built in from the beginning of a campaign and really expands. I think we just scratched the surface on what you can do with this technology to communicate to people.
Maybe in the future they can be live streaming from the charter plane in between their real life events. Who knows? Danielle asks, do all the crew and production team need background checks to work on these campaign events or any special credentials?
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing about a campaign across the board is it really works to be as inclusive and diverse, and really getting anyone and folks involved. As far as the kind of campaign is concerned, that's kind of how they look at it. Beyond that, I think a lot of folks in our kind of production community have worked on events that either somebody from either the president or that gets Secret Service production has kind of been on, and they kind of just do a standard background check for safety. But
It's a fairly niche sort of, you probably wouldn't even call it necessarily entertainment, the political touring realm. However, it does have a lot of the foundations of what we do in the rest of the entertainment industry. Yeah. Is it, aside from you, because I know you go and do other stuff, but is there enough work for somebody to be in that kind of genre throughout the year, or is it more a seasonal sort of job for production people?
Yeah, I'd say it's more seasonal. An interesting thing about politics specifically, which has been expanding over the years, but specifically when it comes to presidential elections, is a lot of the budget to do large scale production isn't really there until the last 3 or 4 months. And so you got to be really, really scrappy at the beginning of a campaign. And that's the same for most of the campaigns, or all of them that started this cycle, same 4 years ago. And it's remarkable. You can go on Flickr, is a great place, and kind of see where these campaigns start. And a lot of times, it's, Beto O'Rourke, on an Apple box with a bullhorn. That's the production budget. But the amazing thing about that is it's kind of how I got my start in 2016, is the elements of production, rather it be touring backgrounds, theater, or anything. When you do something as simple as that, it's really easy to make a big impact. It's really easy to say, hey, we're going to set up the shot a little differently. There's no budget to necessarily needed to say, hey, we're going to just shoot this way, or, we're going to find something a little bit taller to stand on. The solutions are easier, which come from our background, which kind of get your foot in the door. And so you can kind of grow with it. And so for anyone who's involved in it, I'd say you get in kind of at the beginning. And then, presidential politics is where there's a lot, especially at the end of a campaign, a lot more resources, whether that be with lighting or LED or video, to kind of bring in folks that kind of do this on a full-time basis. But there's ways in which you can take the experience kind of coming out of a presidential campaign and then apply it into other political works. But it is something that kind of really builds up, but it's really only in 3 months out of a campaign cycle, and then kind of dies down. But it allows for itself to be reinvented and for new talent to kind of come in.
I love that. I think it's great that you can bring I guess maybe not as extreme, but some theatricalness to what they're doing to make it look, feel, the experience to be more effective. And as you know, that can be make or break a presentation, or make or break a rally and things like that. So that's amazing that there's some people back there doing that work.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit, because I'm interested as well, about the 2028 Olympic bid? So
Yeah.
What's that event as a whole? Is it a televised event? What was the setup, and what was your role on it?
So the Olympics is a dream project that I've always, wanted to work on. And so this was really kind of getting the opportunity to come on when cities get to go bid for the Olympics. They get to put on a presentation to the IOC, to the committee, and go through a really long process, of where are the hotels in your city and how you're going to build up a city. Los Angeles is a unique thing because they did the 1984 Olympic bid, and so it has a lot of this infrastructure. It's a big city, it's built out. And so still go through the process of, okay, if the Olympics were to be here, what does this look like? How does it feel? And so you are kind of presenting the city to the committee and competing against other cities. And so it's a presentation on steroids. And so kind of my role was to kind of help with the kind of set up the producing of any of the physical events that happened around the city. A lot of that became press conferences. But a lot of what we got to do is that the committee doesn't actually get to come to your city except for like this one period of time. And so a lot of what you're trying to do is generate media, generate news, generate headlines, kind of showcasing why your city is the best city to kind of receive the bid. And so it was a fun project to kind of see from the beginning of what we're talking about may happen in a far time. Like that was 2017 for a bid in 2024 that became 28. And so we're talking about a decade into the future. But it was really fun because for LA, the city's built. And so one of my kind of more favorite things was we got to go into an empty Staples Center and basically put our branding, on the LED and everywhere else and do a press conference in an empty arena, which is usually strange, something you wouldn't do, but something that kind of was like, this is exactly what it's going to look like. Here you go. And it was something that we got to do that other cities kind of didn't get a chance for.
And how long was that project end to end in terms of that campaign?
I started at the beginning of 2017 in January, and we would do about 2 to 3 different things a month. And so it was a marathon that ended about a year later. Wow.
And how big was the team that worked on that project?
That my part was kind of nimble. It was about 5-6 people kind of within my sphere, but it had a large operation that did a lot of other things. The majority of it was not, production. It was a lot of, putting together proposals and documents and all the fun stuff that is not my forte.
It must be amazing though, because now it's still so far away. So it's an upcoming event that you've helped. Like you're going to get satisfaction when it's actually there in 2028, because you'll be like, well, actually, I helped get it across the line that many years ago, right?
Definitely. It was an amazing opportunity, and it's also something very exciting to kind of see different arenas and stadiums, and now especially with the new football stadium that's being built, to kind of see that from the beginning and kind of understand a lot of these decisions being made, and then to see it actually happen is awesome.
Tiffany has a question and says, any advice for somebody who's a theatrical stage manager interested into moving into the corporate and event world that you're in? What would you advise them?
Yeah, I mean, talk to as many people as possible. I think that when I first got into this world, and I think that I've kind of jumped around to a bunch of different worlds, just talk to people, reach out to folks. Folks definitely, especially now, are open to sharing how they got involved and just leap for opportunities. And especially when something starts, like just be open to different ideas of doing things and how you can get to yes, how you can help somebody solve a problem. Asking folks what they need help with is an easy way of what are you looking for, and then can you help them solve that problem.
And how did you get started yourself? What was your sort of first foray into this work?
Yeah, I mean, my background was in high school. I started in stagecraft, working in an old theater, and that was great because if you work in an old theater, nothing really works. And so you're constantly trying to figure out how to make something work, or how to make something look good, or how to build something. And so, you know, started in audio, and then kind of jumped over to lighting. And then by the time I was a senior in high school, I was kind of jumped over into stage management. How do you bring audio and lighting kind of together and put on a show? And then I went to film school for college and really learned how do you tell that story through the lens of a camera, and then kind of continue to build on that. And so when I graduated, I worked in TV and feature films, scripted and unscripted, daytime and prime time, and then got into live broadcasts like the Grammys and other award shows, and then went over to Lionsgate and worked in development, and so kind of got a very wide range of experience where, you know, just kind of popped around really quick to try many different parts of the industry as possible. And I think that's what kind of gave me the wide kind of lens of how, you know, it's all kind of the same equipment. And you know, lighting works the same way, whether it's a TV show or theater. It's how you use it that makes a difference. And the biggest part of that is really the crew. You know, I've said for a while, and definitely believe it, is, you know, everyone wants to go work on a show with a fancy title because it sounds cool, because folks maybe know it. But some of the most fun shows I've ever worked on, shows that folks have never heard of, because it's all about the people who you work with. And so I think that's what's been the most you know, fulfilling part of my journey, which is being able to work with folks that have inspired me to say, hey, look, you know, you can do it a little bit differently, or to bring out kind of the best in what we do. And so my journey, albeit I've been able to work in different parts of the industry, it's really the people that have kind of helped me get from one place to the other.
That was going to be my question, because, you know, because of that diversity, it's kind of interesting. Well, oh, you haven't had experience in this, so why should we hire you on that project? But if it's people moving from one thing to the other, is that what you're saying? That's how people gave you opportunities then, from different genre to genre?
Yeah, I think it's different opportunity. I think it's also something where I've fallen into a little bit of a niche where work on big shows now, problem solving, you know, with global implications, but the show's never been done before. Rather it's go build a TV studio and you got 6 days, go do it. Oh, by the way, you don't always control the camera, because sometimes we'll control the camera, other times it's the press. And then there's going to be headlines written about this, and then people are going to decide on, are they going to vote based on what is set up here in a very sterile environment. So it got to that. But when I break it down and go all the way backwards, it's the fact that when I was younger, I just wouldn't say no to something. Something would come up, it'd be big. Yeah, sure, I want to go do that. Not having any idea what it was. And so through that process, then have built out teams and resources to be able to ask for help. And so was in a unique position here where, you know, I've worked at a studio, I've worked at a network, I've worked on sound stages, I've worked on these pieces and parts individually. And so when it comes to a new or a different opportunity, it's really just pulling on your resources, pulling on your strengths of, okay, well, you know, individually, we've done all these different things. And so especially in a new project, when no one's done it, it's okay, well, break it down. What are we doing here? And then who are the folks, who are the people who have done this that we can pull in and can think creatively, can be open-minded to not being set in any one way. Because when you're doing something different, you've got to be adaptable. You got to be able to try something for it not to work, and then to very quickly be able to change how you're doing it to be able to get it to work.
So the people that you bring together are that tribe, the ones that are ready to adapt and to deal with the uncertainty, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And always, one of the things I love the most is working with the new folks, you know, rather that be somebody who's experienced and been doing this for decades, or somebody who's, you know, right out of school and green and just wants to jump in. I love meeting new people and really seeing how their ideas, you know, change and bring things to the table.
Keith has a good question too. In terms of the Biden campaign, what was the kind of production staff hierarchy? Was there a primary Biden manager running things, or you, or how did the hierarchy sort of work?
Yeah, so my role was kind of focusing on the studio. And so because there was a studio in Wilmington, Delaware, um, for President-elect Biden, and then there's a studio in Washington, D.C. And so I had a counterpart that worked on the D.C. studio, and then I would report to folks up in the campaign kind of structure, but then production would kind of fall under me. And the thing is, because production isn't really the main focus of a campaign, all the production then would fall under me. So that was a kind of a clear line of I'd kind of report up on the campaign side and then down with production.
So you built the team for that?
Yeah.
And is that part of it? So that's part of Camp Presents, because Camp Presents is your company, right? So tell us about that, and then tell us about your team.
Yeah, so the Camp Presents is a sustainable media company and certified B Corporation, and we produce cinematic live broadcasts and original content for entertainment and politics. And so the Biden campaign was a perfect example of being able to do that. And it was something that wasn't planned. We went into the pandemic in March like everybody, and decided to focus on what do we want to do next. Really looked at this pandemic as an opportunity to push pause in an industry that we never stop going. So we talked about earlier, like we're going 24/7 a lot of times, and said, what do we want to do next? Where do we want to go? And so spent from March till August, really deciding what is that next project? What is that perfect project? And so we have branded Camp as such, and then got fortunate enough to get the call and literally got to do everything we talked about. And so there were folks throughout that process that we'd reached out to saying, hey, if we were going to build a studio, how would we build a studio? And who are the people that we'd want to bring on board? And what is that, putting that team together? And so I think that luck is all about preparation meets opportunity. And that's exactly what happened. We had prepared to do what we wanted to do. And then when the opportunity came, it became a natural instinct of how to solve a problem because we'd already thought of a solution.
And who made that phone call to you? Who was the person that directed the Biden campaign to your resources?
Yeah, somebody who I worked on 4 years ago on the last campaign, and somebody who I'd worked with, and somebody who I'd sent ideas out along the way when we were rebranding and doing this of, hey, I think this would be a good idea. And so really just stayed in touch with folks and let folks know what you want to do. And definitely how you can help. And I remember sending an email out in March saying, hey, I think these would be some cool ideas for the campaign to do. And 9 out of 10 of those emails that you send out, they go unanswered. But it's just one that you need to work to be able to kind of to break through.
Sure. And a lot of companies have forged their way ahead this year or a way anyway. It doesn't need to be ahead. It's about survival 2020, but forging a way to sustain themselves in their company by expanding their resources or expanding their capabilities and adopting that. So good for you on that. I want to know, sort of, as it comes up in terms of technology in the future now, given what we've learned and what you've learned over the past 12 months, what's next year going to be like for you, and in what sort of projects? Maybe you can't see into the future, but in terms of tech, is there technology that's coming up that's exciting you, or that you're looking forward to using with your work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, a year ago, I don't think anyone thought that this is where we'd be now. So I think that, especially for the next 12 months, I hold no expectations of what or anything that may happen. But I do believe that as this technology, rather it be, what you and I are doing here and how it's being implemented across the production, center, a lot of things are being reinvented. A lot of things are being forced to being rethought. And so I think that as different productions kind of come back online early next year, as things, vaccine comes out, things become safer, I think that there's going to be a reinvention of how do we do things, of how can we make things safer, how can we make things better. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for anyone in any industry, but particularly in ours, because everything has stopped. That once we start going again, that we can really do things differently and better, and we'll appreciate some of the small things that we took for granted and get to do. So for us particularly, I think that studio and broadcast and kind of being able to work directly with smaller clients to do larger shows is something that's an interesting way. I think you also have a shift of folks, like sports teams that, want to generate their own content. You've got companies and different entities that might have used to need a network or, a large promoter to go do something, where now you can go try something on a small scale and you can generate interest. And if it works, then you can grow things. And so I think that's a great way for next year to start in, kind of creating opportunity.
And is there anything personally that you'd like to try out in terms of a particular project or anything like that, or no?
Right now, I'm resting and recovering from the last 15 weeks, but I really love working on new things that don't have a blueprint. And so as I look to next year, I think that there's a lot of different opportunities. And I think one of the things that most interests me is that we have focused on the last year we became a B corporation and a sustainable media company, and really working on how we can implement a more sustainable ecosystem to our shows. I think it's a really fascinating thing that beyond it being, something that I care about, I also think that from a business thing, it's going to become more important. It's going to become something where the more that we can work together as a community to solve climate change, the better that we're going to be able to continue to do these shows. And I think that it's something that just adds another element to these shows that makes it different from before.
I totally agree. I think that's going to become a lot more important in the future, and almost an expectation from companies to be that way. And certainly I hope so. And what do you do? Explain to us how that would work in your company to be more sustainable. What are some of the practices that you do?
Yeah. So a lot of them is reaching out to folks. And so we've got a wide range of folks that we've put together that we can learn from. And education is key. It's the first step of kind of understanding what are other folks doing that works. And so one of the simple things is we've all seen the kind of the element of recycle, the triangle of reduce, reuse, recycle. And so you can apply that in the same way. And I think a lot of folks go, oh, well, we're going to recycle. But the first element is how to reduce what you are using on a show. And so that came to us on a project earlier this year where they wanted to use clean power. And so a diesel generator was off the table. But the building that we're in didn't have the power requirements that we needed. And so because it was something of a priority for the client, we came up with what are the other options available, really thought outside the box. And then what we ended up doing was putting power into the building, which you're not always going to have the opportunity to do, because we thought, well, A, it's going to take a lot of time, and B, it's take a lot of money. But that was something that the client wanted to do, so we went ahead and did it. And what shocked us about it was it took no more time and didn't cost any more money than the generator at the end of the day.
Wow.
But it was something that you would think if you're going to add power into a building, that's going to cost a lot more money than pulling in a generator. Turns out it didn't. And so it was a lesson that we took to say, hey, how can we look at this in every aspect of what we do, to take a moment, either before a show, if not always during the show, then definitely after a show, to say, is there a better way to do this? Because now, especially with something like power, all of our shows need it. And when we leave, the next show that comes in after us doesn't now need to bring in a generator. So not only did we make it cleaner for our show, we made it cleaner for their show. And since they don't need to bring in a generator and they didn't have the cost of putting in that power, that gives them the opportunity to do something else. And so it's that kind of thinking of how can we do that on every show? Because even though we all work on different shows, we're all going into similar venues. We, you know, somebody moves out, somebody else moves in. And so it's how can we really work together as a community where even if it's not always going to directly benefit us, it can benefit the people who come after us.
And there's so many events that throw away, you know, any trade shows and, you know, award shows, and they build these massive sets. And I've been quite fascinated by the Mandalorian show, you know, I mean, TV show, because they've used a lot of that LED immersive thing. So I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lesser need to build an entire set to create that environment, and it's more a virtual realm, yet it looks so real, right? So I really think that's a kind of an interesting thing. But for me, with the event stuff, there's still so much that's being thrown away, you know. Is there places in Los Angeles where things get recycled like that, do you know? Or
yeah, there's companies coming up. I mean, I'm part of the Producers Guild, and they've got something called the Green Book, and they've got ways in which that has put together resources. And so part of the education is on working with folks to say, hey, you know, where do they go? But when it comes to recycling tools, I know a great designer who we work with, where what it comes down to is when you're building it from the beginning, got to build it with it being recycled in mind, to kind of decide what elements to use, what's out there that can be reused, what's out there that's not, how does it be constructed, which at first kind of takes a moment to kind of wrap your head around how does that work. But once you do it once, it then becomes second nature. And it's little differences like that add up individually. Each element isn't going to make a difference, but together it's really going to change how it's done. So in LA, I think that it's something, and across the board, there's more and more companies that are getting involved on helping things be recycled, and you know, working with other companies and saying, hey, you know, we're done with this. Does somebody else need it? Opposed to just completely, you know, loading it out.
Well, here living in Asia, it's the worst, because I think they throw everything here. I just cannot stand. Are there resources that people can look to get information? Do you know with regards to your area?
Other resources, I mean, Google, honestly, when we don't know something, we'll just kind of Google a lot of the time what area we're in, and then go from there. Particularly in recycling, there's a lot more that's coming online with different resources where, like, you know, there'll be a local like battery recycling center. So we'll call them and say, hey, we have this, you know, do you know, can you guys take it? If you guys can't, do you know somebody who can take it? And so really kind of think outside the box of production specific companies, but rather kind of broader companies. And they've been pretty helpful in pushing us in the right direction, or kind of connecting us with the right folks to make sure that, you know, we're just not throwing things away. But when it comes to sustainability, the throwing it away is like the last part. And I think that's where, you know, folks kind of focus on. For us, it's like, start at the beginning. How can you reduce what you need? And then if you can't reduce it, then how can you reuse it, either on our own shows, or how can we, you know, like, we'll talk with all the vendors and say, hey, look, here's like a list of everything. Do you guys want any of this before we have to get rid of it? Because if you need it, then that means you can use it either at your shop or in another way. And most of the time, they'll take care of it. And then there's some things that can't be done. And then we'll talk to the vendors that we got it from and say, hey, you know, have you guys recycled this? If you guys can't use it for something else on another project, have you, and then kind of put it together. So
wonderful. Well, I really appreciate that your company is leading the charge on that as well, because it's such a wonderful endeavor. We should all be continuing to do that as we work for different companies, try to be as resourceful and as green as possible. So thank you. And thank you for letting us spend an hour with you today. I really appreciate it. I know it's really, really early over there and it's really, really late here. So thank you for getting up for that. I really appreciate it. Before we say goodbye, guys, I'm just going to show you a couple of webinars we've got coming next week. We're going to stay in Los Angeles. We're going to be speaking to a couple of the women who work for the WNBA on game presentation and fan engagement. We're going to be speaking with Matthew Stern from the Broadway Stage Management Symposium, and we have a discussion on accessibility in theatre, an inside look into sensory-friendly performances. So please make sure that you sign up for those. They're all free. You can find them on our website, www.theatreartlife.com. And we'll see you for the next one. Blake, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best for Christmas and 2021.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.